Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you today to our program entitled The Inhabitants of Crescent Hill Cemetery. My name is Fran Carr, for those of you who don't know me. I want to start off right off by thanking a few people before we get started. First off, Jacob Fields, who is a co-worker of mine and has done the editing for this program. We oftentimes have to do it in parts and have to piece it together, and that's just out of my skill set, and so he does that for me. Sometimes I have someone else to do it, but today it's Jacob. I also want to take the time to thank Anne Higgins and her granddaughter Shauna Higgins. They were both just invaluable in doing this program and helping me get information on the people who are buried in Crescent Hill, and you will see them in some footage later on in the film. I would also like to tell you that some of the film footage was not intended to be used here when I initially filmed it. It was basically filmed for me to be able to go back and look at it again and make sure I had all my facts straight. But I thought some of it was just really good, and I needed to just incorporate it and let Anne tell you in her words what she was telling me. So you're going to hear me, and you're going to hear Shauna and Anne talking, and it's kind of more like a conversation that we're having. Sometimes we get tickled. We did that a lot. So, just kind of bear with that, because I still think it's well worth the effort to include that footage in this presentation. It's also, because I wasn't planning to use it, I just set the camera up and started filming. I didn't check the focus or anything. And at times it's a little out of focus. It's a little dark. So just bear with that. It's still good information, and that's what we're after, is the good information. So without any further ado, I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And we're going to start the slideshow for you. Okay, as I said earlier, our program is entitled The Inhabitants of Crescent Hill Cemetery, the cemetery and the lives of the people there. A lot of the people buried here, well, really, lots of the people buried here, quietly made history. Whether they realized at the time they were doing that or not, they most certainly were making history. And if they weren't making history, they were at least a part of the history being made. That we will find formerly enslaved persons buried here, military members, businessmen and women, and that's just for starters. Many of these people scratched and clawed to make a living and to provide a better life for their children than they had. And they did just that. These are people buried here are the parents and the grandparents and the great-grandparents of preachers, public school teachers, college professors, military officers, doctors, and even a pro football player. We're going to talk also in this film a little bit about an area of Falmouth commonly known as Little Egypt. Little Egypt is for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, Little Egypt is in the east end of Falmouth, and it's bounded by Shelby Street on one side. It includes Licking Street, Beach, and part of 4th. We're not covering near as much of that part of town as I had hoped. There was just so much information that I decided that I think we can probably just do a tour of that end of town and let it stand on its own. The cemetery, let me see, is located on Marquette Road, just off of Wagner's Ferry Road. It might be a couple of miles, but certainly no more than that from Licking Street in Falmouth. The first burial that can be documented here was in 1911. Martha Hall, the daughter of John and Maria Patton Hall, was the first burial. She was 25 years old. We do not have a death record for her, and her grave is not marked. At this time, we're going to cut to a film, and Anne is going to talk a little bit about how this cemetery came about.
Now,
Do you know when that cemetery started?
No, I wish Ed, Ed Hall was his name, Mr. Hall.
Mm-hmm.
He knew everything about all the blacks and everything. He came from out of Ohio to Kentucky, Mr. Hall, and he told me how the cemetery got started because he said this man that owned all this land up there,
Mm-hmm.
and he said that and he don't want her to raise tobacco or something like that, and nothing would grow. The ground wasn't that good, and so he donated the cemetery for the black because it was people that was scattered so much.
Okay, now I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about the children buried in Crescent Hill. I don't know about you all, but for me, the most tragic thing about cemeteries are the deaths of the children. So many of them, and you're going to see that today, would have lived had they been born a few years later. And we have penicillin around. Just something just as simple as penicillin would have saved their lives. And we take that so for granted today. I considered a child to be anyone under 21. So, some of them may be a little bit older than you might think of as children. Many of these children do not have grave markers. I use death certificates and find a grave to identify them. So we'll start here. Oops, I'm on the wrong slide. Let me get back to the right one. There we go. Ruth Ann Allen was the daughter of Isham and Anna Mae Hand Allen, and we are going to talk about Isham a little bit later on. But he was born in Bracken County in 1888, and Anna Mae was from Pendleton County. She was a hand, born here in 1892. Both of them, as I said, are buried here, but we're going to talk about Isham a little later on. The Clemens children, Charles, Martha, and Mildred, were all siblings, and note that they all died of pneumonia, penicillin again. They were, as I said, the children of Charles and Elizabeth Cass Clemens, and Elizabeth died in 1927 from a heart ailment, and she is buried at Crescent Hill as well. She was 38 years old at the time of her death. 3 years later, in the 1930 census, Charles was living on Riggs Street in Falmouth. He was a widower, and his age was about 38 years of age. He gave his birth state as Tennessee. That was the last time I found Charles Clemens in Pendleton County. Doesn't mean he wasn't here longer than that, but just in a quick glance at the census records, that's where they ended for him. Of the Coleman children listed, Will Coleman is the very bottom list, and as you can see, he's about 18 years old. He had pneumonia again. He was the son of Martin and Lula Miller Coleman. I'm not sure how he is related to the other two Coleman children on this page, but they are siblings. So Eleonora and Theodore Mark were siblings. Their parents, Charles and Mabel Frances Wright Clemens. Eleonora, as you can see, died of a fractured skull from falling out of bed. On the next page is, the first one is a brother to Eleonora and Albert Eugene. Again, another pneumonia death, and you're going to see a lot of those in this cemetery. Cecil Conrad's parents were Richard Sherman Conrad and Della Robertson Conrad. Ella Mae's parents were Robinson Conrad and Francis Davenport Conrad. And, again, these two deaths were a little more unusual for this cemetery. Anna Lee Crozier was the daughter of Lee and Carrie Maud Ayres Crozier. She was also the mother of Rose Crozier, who is listed further down the list. She was 19 years old at the time of her death, and she died shortly after, just a couple of months, not, I don't think even, yeah, just a couple of months after her daughter was stillborn. Carrie was the daughter of Robert and Betty Price Ayers. Both of Anna Lee's parents are buried here, as well as her grandparents. And we will be visiting the grave site of Robert and Betty Ayers a little later on. And we'll talk about the Ayers family here and there throughout the rest of the program, as many of the residents of Crescent Hill are related or connected to them. Patricia Crozier is the daughter of Harry and Bertha Allen Crozier, or was the daughter, I should say. Gerald Taylor, the very last person listed, was the son of Emmett and Ella Thompson Taylor. And he had cerebral palsy. We will be talking about Anthony Cole Graves on this is listed at the bottom of this page a little later on. That's Ann's brother, and she's going to talk a little bit about that situation. But his parents were Will and Grace Watson Graves. Let's see, who am I leaving out? Frank Hood died in a house fire in his home, and this one made the Falmouth Outlook. It's really a very tragic story. It was in the Outlook on the 25th of April, 1923. The headline was "Child Burns to Death When Home is Destroyed." Frank, the 4-year-old son of Mr. and Mrs. Warren Hood, colored, of East Falmouth, was burned to death early Wednesday morning when the Hood home was destroyed by fire. The family were asleep in a bedroom upstairs when in some mysterious way, the fire broke out in the dining room on the first floor. The whole lower floor was enveloped in flames before they were awakened. The Hoods have 4 children ranging in age from 12 to a babe of a few months old. When they discovered the flame, the eldest girl ran out of the house. Mrs. Hood carried the babe to safety, and Mr. Hood carried another child. When he attempted to return to the bedroom after the other child, the flames had gained such headway that he could not get back into the house. Mrs. Ellen Hand, mother of Mrs. Hood, who resides with the family, was also asleep in an upstairs room. She leaped from a second-story window to the ground. She was seriously injured in the fall. The fire alarm was turned in as soon as the flames were discovered, but the house was of frame construction and the fire gained headway so rapidly that nothing was saved. Then it goes on to describe the body of the child being removed from the house, and it gives a rather graphic description that I'm just not going to go into. And then it further states that the child probably died of suffocation in a few moments after the flames reached the bedroom. This theory is advanced because no outcry was heard by those who were near the house when it was burning. And it's not known how the fire originated. So, and then there goes on to put out a call for help for food and clothing and shelter for this family. Then let's see, Ruth Ann Hood was the daughter of Walter Hood, and Walter, I believe, was the son of Warren and Margaret. Ed Hudson Jr. was the son of Ed and Sally Hall Hudson. William Harmon Hudson was his brother. I could not make a bit, not one letter out of Ed Hudson Jr.'s cause of death. The cholera infantum is defined as an acute, non-contagious intestinal disturbance of infants, formerly common in congested areas of high humidity and temperature, but now rare. And then, as I said earlier, we will be talking about Anthony Graves just a little bit later on. And with that, we're going to move on to the veterans of this cemetery. Typically in Pendleton County, we have a lot of veterans in just about every cemetery, and this one is no exception there. We found World War I, World War II, and Korean veterans buried in this cemetery. Pendleton County's African Americans have always heeded the call to serve this country. Some of the earliest to served in the U.S. colored troops in the Civil War, and there is at least one of those veterans buried here. I found 18 veterans, and I cannot guarantee you that I found them all. I tried. The stone you're looking at here was Ralph Taylor, and he was the father of Skip Taylor. So those of you who are from Falmouth, we all knew Skip, who just recently passed away, but this was his father's stone. Skip, the son of this Ralph, was the first African-American student to attend the integrated schools in Pendleton County, which occurred after the passage of Brown versus the Board of Education. He went to Morgan in the fall of 1955, and Falmouth integrated the next year. So Skip made history by being the first African-American student in the previously all-white public schools and of Pendleton County. The independent school, Falmouth was still an independent school district, so that came the next year. So on to the veterans. We're going to do a little bit about Charles Luther Allen. First off, he died in Korea, and as you can tell from his birth year and his death year, he was a young man, about 27 or 8 years old. Okay. He died in Cincinnati, and I found this article in a Cincinnati paper. It was dated, let's see, it's Cincinnati Enquirer, dated the 3rd of June, 1957. A man dying of a gunshot wound was found early yesterday lying on a Walnut Hills home's porch where he apparently had been dumped. The victim, who died before reaching the hospital, was identified tentatively last night as Charles L. Allen, about 38, a Korean War veteran. Patrolman James F. Boner thought the victim was drunk when he arrived, and it gives the address, shortly after 2 a.m. to investigate a report that someone was lying on the porch. A spilled carton of chop suey laid nearby, but examining the face-down body after recalling a patrol wagon, the officer found a bullet hole to the left side of the victim's chest. Absence of the blood leading to the porch led to homicide investigators to believe that he may have been shot elsewhere and taken to the Clayton Street address in an automobile and then just dumped there. So, and it goes on to say that that he went to pick up his food. He paid with a $10 bill and got some change back, but he had a wad of bills in his hand. And that when they found him, he had less than $2 on him, which was may have been the change from the order. A woman tried to identify him, and she claimed he was her brother, but she didn't give a very good description of him. And later on, they just were able to discredit her completely. But the second woman who was able to described him accurately, including the clothing that he was wearing. And that's what the article says in the rest of it. Then the next day, they did question a woman in Avondale in connection with his death. And this paper lists him as 35, which is probably not right. She was arrested in her apartment on Reading Road, and her name was Miss Ramona Pollard. She denied knowledge of the shooting, but police said she was the last known person to have seen Allen before he was shot. Later, police arrested Ike Bolton, said to be Miss Pollard's common-law husband. I never found anything else in the paper about the death, so I don't know that it ever went to trial or not. Then we also want to go on down the list. The next person is General Lee Allen, and that is his name. It was an interesting thing because when he went into the service, into the Navy, they told him he could not be named general. So they changed his name to Gene. So I would find, when I was researching him, I found records for Gene Allen and General Allen. It's the same person. So that was kind of an interesting. Ralph Price Ayers was the son of Robert and Betty Price Ayers. We've already mentioned them earlier, and we're going to visit their grave later on as well. The 4 Baker boys were all brothers. Alfred, the first one listed, served in the 25th Infantry Company A as a private. This regiment goes back to 1866, making it one of the oldest regiments in the Army. It was known as the Buffalo Soldiers during World War I. Wait a minute. Yeah, it's part of the Buffalo Soldiers. During World War I, this regiment became part of the 93rd Infantry Division, and they fought with French troops in the Champagne, Verdun, Ace, and Anold sectors of the front. And that source was blackpast.org. However, I found a conflicting source, so I'm going to just throw them both out there. You all can sort it out. Sorry about that. William McNeil wrote a book called Black Baseball Out of Season, and he said that during World War I, the 25th was assigned to garrison duty at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii and did not seek combat at all. The Army's website did not post a history for this regiment past 1890. So I was unable to verify which one was accurate. Leroy Baker is, as you see in the AAF, that is the Army Air Force. This was before the Air Force as we know it today was actually formed. The Air Force as we know it today was formed in 1947. The time when these men served, the military was segregated. Desegregation of forces did not happen until July 26, 1948. The Baker boys had parents who were Alfred and Caroline Ayers Baker. The parents are also buried at Crescent Hill. Caroline Baker's father was a brother to Ralph Ayers. So the Bakers and the Ayers, the Baker boys and Ralph Ayers were cousins. Okay. I've not found a connection here between the halls that are listed in the kind of in the middle, Clarence and Joe Leslie. I'm pretty sure they have to be, but Clarence's mother was the former Mamie McGee, and that is a relative of Edwin McGee, and we will visit Edwin later on. Harry Marion Crozier was in the quartermaster service of World War II. Robert L. Graves served in the Navy. He's the second one we've seen so far in the Navy. Walter Warren Hood was an ambulance driver, and he earned a Bronze Star. I was unable to find out what he did for the Bronze Star. My imagination can run wild, though, thinking about him driving an ambulance during the war. We already met his daughter. That was Ruth Ann Hood, who died as a child. So I did want to kind of point that out. And then, as I said, we've got a little clip later on Edwin McGee. But I'm going to back up here to the Hood brothers. Private Calvin C. Hood, colored, is stationed at Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was recently accidentally shot in the right shoulder while on maneuvers in that state. However, he is much improved. His brother, Private Walter W. Bud Hood, was injured several days ago when a truck in which he was riding turned over. I think that's supposed to be Private Hood. It looks like Pat period, but I think it's privatehood, was in the rear of the truck when the accident occurred and was injured when a stove rolled over on him. He is still confined to a hospital at Camp Atterbury, Indiana. Both are the sons of Mr. and Mrs. Warren Hood of this city. And then, as we saw on the other list, we saw Edwin McGee. He had a garage here in Falmouth, located at 400 Shelby Street. He was a descendant of Emerson McGee, who hailed from Mechanicsburg. Emerson was born into slavery. His enslaver was known simply as Round, R-O-U-N-D. Apparently it was a nickname, McGee. Emerson joined the USCT during the Civil War, mustering in at Kentucky. So his son then was drafted into World War II and served as a sergeant in the U.S. Army. Eddie McGee's son, also served in the military. So the McGees have a military history behind them. We know him, for those of us in Falmouth, we know him as Chipper. Sharon, this particular Eddie McGee's daughter, was the first African-American teacher in the integrated public schools, having taught at Falmouth School. And the ad is just a clipping, and I should say here that I found that at the Historical Society, and I want to thank Teresa Griffin for helping me with this search that led me to this. Then on the next page, we see Emmett Taylor, who was a corporal in the Korean War. Ralph Taylor, we already World War I. And then John Eugene Warner and Isaac Williams. We will be talking about the Warner family a little bit later on. But our next page, we're going to look at Isaac Williams. This particular grave can be found on the left side as you drive into the cemetery. It's on down a little bit on the left. He was in the U.S. Colored Troops, 100th Regiment, Company E. In his will, he mentions his wife's brother's name as Emerson McGee. So he was a brother-in-law to Emerson McGee and an uncle to Eddie. Her death certificate lists, but his wife, her death certificate lists Joseph Clark as her father and her mother as Hannah. So I'm assuming that probably Isaac Williams' wife, and Emerson McGee were more like half siblings from that. But Mrs. Williams is buried here with him, and she died in June of 1917 from a heart ailment. She was 64 years old, and he died in September on the 8th of the same year of prostate cancer. He was exactly 1 month short of his 80th birthday. Also in his will, he mentioned being cared for by Dennis Conrad and his wife Hattie, and he left them a bequest of no less than $25 per week for each week that they cared for him. In that will, he mentioned that Hattie was his niece. His estate was left to both his wife's and his nieces and nephews. There were no children mentioned in it. Some of his relatives who benefited from the will were living in Kansas, and he notes that in his will. So I wasn't really sure if they had children and they outlived them. Nothing turned up for them. So we will move on now to some other burials here in Crescent Hill. I'm going to start off with the Ayers family. This is the marker, and when you pull in the drive, it's going to be right there on your left. That tree is just right inside the gate, and the marker is in front of it. This marker is for Robert Ayers and his wife, Elizabeth Price Ayers. She was known as Betty. Mr. Ayers was the custodian at the Pendleton County Courthouse for many years, and his wife was a teacher. Her family came from Xenia, Ohio. Their son, Dr. Willis Ayers, who was born in Falmouth, was instrumental in starting a hospital in Columbus, Georgia, that was exclusively for African Americans. And he is the one that placed the stone. I don't know if you can see that at the bottom, very last two lines, it mentions that it was placed there in honor of them by him. These people right here, Robert and Betty, were the maternal grandparents of Coach John Ayres Merritt. His mother, Eva Grace Merritt, being their daughter. If you have been to Falmouth in the last couple of years, you know that the bridge going over US 27 as you enter over the Licking River as you come into Pendleton, as you come into Falmouth on US 27 has been renamed for John Ayres Merritt. He is one of the winningest college football coaches in history, and he's been dead since the 1980s, and he's still on that list. So he really did some pretty awesome things. He coached, for those of us that are older, you'll remember Too Tall Jones and a few others that would ring bells with us from that era. The Ayres family was freed from their enslavement in Bourbon County, and they moved to Harrison and then moved to Pendleton, and they've been were free people of color in the early 1800s, back that far. Robert and Betty are also the great-great-grandparents of Seattle Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson. His great-grandmother Wilson being the former Marguerite Ayres, their daughter. But that was worthy of a notation there. And then next we are going to talk about Dennis and Hattie Conrad. I mentioned them earlier with Isaac Williams, with Hattie being his niece. In 1927, they resided at 411 Licking Street in Little Egypt. Dennis was a mechanic at that time. And so then we are going to also look at Robinson T. Conrad. He is buried next to them, and they are, the Robinsons are just inside the gate as well. They're going to be on the right, across from the Ayres. Robinson's brothers, Cecil and Ray, and their father, Sherman, also known as Richard, are buried here. They do not have markers on their graves. Richard lived at 412 Licking Street, so he was across the street from Dennis in 1927. His occupation was a paper hanger, and paper hanger is in wallpaper. He hung wallpaper. Oftentimes those people also sold wallpaper. We're going to let Ann talk a little bit about the Conrad family now.
He died in 1960.
Yeah, he had a brother named Charles. They were so different. When he told his wife when he died, this is where he wanted to be, and she brought him here, but she's not buried here. She's buried up in Ohio or somewhere.
Was that where they were living when he died?
Just in here.
Okay.
I can't think of the name of the city.
Okay, next we're going to go to the Warner family plot. When you come in the drive at Crescent Hill, the Warners will be next door to the Conrads. So they'll be on your right. You'll pass the Conrads, and then you'll come to Margaret Warner's tombstone, and then to her husband, John Eugene. And I have pictured here both of those tombstones. John's marker is a war marker, war veteran marker. So now then at this time, Ann and Shauna are going to talk about these people for us.
Okay, that Warner had to be, let me see, when he
we
passed.
had an asterisk.
He died in 1916.
Okay, it was, I don't know. Oh, it must be, this one here must be this Margaret Warner, her husband, she must have been married to his son. You don't remember her anyway, because she lived up on B Street in a trailer.
I do. That's the little short lady.
Yeah, because her house caught a fire, and she had paper. He died in 1930.
Next, we will visit the grave site of the Merritts, Lonnie and Susie. If you look in the top right of that picture, you can see Dennis Conrad's burial site. So this is not too far past the entrance to the cemetery. Like I said earlier, you know, when you come into the cemetery, Dennis Conrad is right on your right, and the Merritts would then just be behind him. Susie's maiden name was Ray, R-A-Y. Lonnie was named Alonzo Merritt, and Lonnie was what he was more commonly known. He was a minister. These folks were the grandparents of John Ayres Merritt that I mentioned earlier. So they are his Merritt grandparents. The Ayres were his mother's people, and these are his father's people. Lonnie Merritt was born into slavery in Garrett County, Kentucky. His death certificate lists Kentucky Governor William O. Bradley as his father. However, Bradley was born in 1847 and Merritt in 1857. So it's more likely that they were half brothers, with Robert M. Bradley, the father of the governor, being Lonnie's father as well. The ages just line up a little better. William Bradley was also the only son of Robert Bradley to survive childhood, so that rules out older brothers to the governor as being the father of Lonnie Merritt. Pastor Merritt died in Cleveland, Ohio, and was brought back to Pendleton County to be buried. Theodore Owen Merritt, that we mentioned just briefly when we did the veterans, is buried here, and that is his son. Bradley Merritt is John Ayres Merritt's father and was also a son here as well. And he and another brother named John are buried here at Crescent Hill as well. We are now going to visit the grave sites of the Watsons and the Graves. These are Ann's parents and grandparents' graves. And so she and Shauna are going to talk to us next.
Okay, so her grandfather.
Ann's grandfather.
I'm sorry, yes.
William Watson.
Uncle Man.
Uncle Man. And then Lily was
Lily Pleasant Watson was his first wife.
Okay.
And Minnie
We call her
The
Mom.
second wife.
his second wife.
We said Mom instead of. I don't know where we got that. Me and my brother. We wanted over. Mom, can we go with you? And we used to walk from Beacon Street out here. I think it's only 2 miles. But my grandmother, she just loved to do that, and the Schroeder lived up there, and I wish that.
Now, which of these were your grandmothers? Was it Minnie or was it Lily?
Lily was his first wife. That was my mother's.
So that was your grandmother. Okay.
And William Watson. Now she was she had been married, and she had one son, but her husband died, and he was young, and so I don't know how she come to meet my grandfather, but you know, they're working on farms and out in the fields and stuff.
Because they came from the South.
Okay.
So Lily, before she married Uncle Man, she was last name Simpkins.
That was her husband's name.
Yes, so
But
we
I
have
don't know.
relatives.
Okay. Next, we are going to visit the gravesite of the Porter family. If you come into the cemetery and you go to your right, you're going to, like I said earlier, you'll pass the Robinsons, you pass the Merritts, you'll come to the Watsons and Graves, and then just a little beyond that is the Porter family. You can see behind them are the Croziers as well. And Anne is going to talk to us a little bit about George and Mary Ella Gross Porter. Mary Ella Gross Porter being a relative of Anne's. And you want to tell me a little bit about the Porters here, and I'll get this get this on film, okay? So we're here at the Porter plot. Ann, what can you tell us about George and Mariella? Mariella's related to you, right?
Mariella, she died. I have when she had after she had her last child, which was we call her Dolly, but she's Loretta Louise. Dr. Townsend wife named her, and but I didn't know this lady. Only what one of my cousins. Uh, she lived down by Bowling Green and she got grown. But I think her last after her last child was born. But I don't know. I told them I never knew what she looked like.
Okay.
I never saw her or anything.
Yeah, you would have been awfully small.
Well, I would have been about 3 years old when she passed.
Next of all, we're going to stop and visit with James W. McGee. If you lived in Falmouth during this time frame that's on this tombstone, you probably knew Willie McGee. Willie McGee was a barber here in town. He was Eddie McGee's brother. We already visited Eddie McGee when we talked about the veterans. Willie was just an icon in Falmouth. There's just no other way to put it. Everybody I know has a Willie McGee story. I even have one. As a child, I can remember my brother getting his hair cut there and Willie playing the banjo for us and singing "Oh Susanna," and we had to sing along and dance. This girl doesn't dance well. So it was kind of funny. We also have here, thanks again to Teresa Griffin from the Pendleton County Historical Society, an advertisement for McGee's Barbershop. This ran in the Falmouth Outlook in 1979. So not only did he cut hair, but it looks like he was maybe selling some jewelry around Christmas time. We are going to now go down. We're going to show you where Willie lived in Little Egypt, and Sean is going to talk about him and Anna Mae Crawford, who was his wife. This was where Willie McGee lived.
Yes, so Willie McGee lived here with his wife, Anna Mae Crawford, and there was a door that used to sit there, the entrance, and to the right of the entrance was a pop machine. I want to say it was a Coke machine. And there was a little skinny door that was glass with a handle, so when you would put your money in and you would open that door, you would pull out and it would release a glass bottle of soda. Best, coldest pop ever. And then inside they would sell things, and I remember there being like a glass case with lots of things you could buy. And yeah, it was, good memory of that pop machine as a child.
Well, Mr. Cooper was selling stuff too down the street before you.
Yeah.
But this house here, the reason that room was there, he built that so Annie Mae could have earning so she could file Social Security if something happened to him, which it did. But he came in one day, and Libby was in there, because that was Mama Ann, and Libby was in there, and she was taking groceries home, but Annie Mae wasn't charging her, and he told her that that's what she gonna do. He was gonna close the store, and he did it still for a little bit longer, but
I don't remember ever seeing him at this house.
Okay, next couple of slides I'm just going to show you the slides, and then we're going to go to a video about these people. I mentioned earlier Isham Allen, and I told you that Anne would be talking about him. This is what his stone looks like. So if you're ever in the cemetery, you'll know what to look for. There, Isham was born in 1888 and died in 1971. The next stone I want you to kind of keep in mind is the Strother stone. This is the stone of Ford and his wife Elizabeth Moore Strother. And now then we will show you the video from Anne as she remembers the Strothers and the Allens.
Mixed up, you think you're related to this person, and you might be and you might not, because it winded up that we was mixed up into the Allen family. And and Mr. Isham, he came from Bracken County.
Right.
And you couldn't,
Is that where he was from? Is that what you found, Fran, that he was from Bracken?
Isham, I'm not sure I ever found out much about Isham because I wasn't really tracking him at the time I started entering his stuff.
He
And
he used to work over here as a farmer, and he
Yes.
would walk over here, and then with Miss Annie Mae, well,
And she was a
hooked
hand,
up.
right?
Oh, she was a
Her last
face-
name was Hand.
Anna Mae was the hand, right? She was a hand to start with.
Her and Miss Susie.
And there was a Susie. I remember that. That's somebody buried up there at the cemetery, ain't it? Susie Hand.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that name on a
Could have
tombstone.
been.
Do you know where?
Oh,
Hand is a unique kind
Do
of
you
blessing.
know
Yeah.
where the cemetery is? The Black Cemetery.
Yes.
Okay, up the road is
I
was
say
Richard
yes.
Cooper.
I have the general idea.
Uh-huh.
I've been by there a few times. It's been a while.
Richard
Yeah.
Cooper lived
Yes.
in the house. And then the house used to be owned by George and Hattie Strawler. And
Okay.
so when Aunt Hattie died last, and everything. Well, anyway,
Now
one day,
George was he the barber?
Mr. Ford. his
Well, wasn't
name-
there a Strother that was the
And he
barber?
was Ford Strawler was a
Ford,
barber. He
okay.
was had that back where somebody dropped him when he was a baby and
Okay.
everything. But up there where Richard, my grandmother and we did too on Sundays walk there because it was.
Okay, our next stop is the Vertner plot. There are no markers for the Vertners. We are visiting George and John and John's wife. Vertners had a grocery store, and they sponsored a local all-black, it was either baseball or softball team known as the Giants. Emmett and Jim Taylor, along with Ann's uncles, Tom and Bob, were some of the players that we've been able to identify. This is kind of something new that we've just learned in the last few days. So we haven't had a good chance to research or to talk to people about it, but we did want to throw that out here for you. And so now Anne is going to talk about the Vertners and their store.
Okay, so where was George Vertner's grocery?
B Street.
Okay.
He had a house on the very corner, but it sit back in the yard, and his grocery store was next to
Next
that
door.
up there.
so what is now? What's there now?
Didn't you that Roger Hatton used to have? Okay.
Oh, that it's like
Okay.
at the corner of.
Beach and Fourth.
Okay.
Do you know where the house is before you get to Ann Reynolds' house? The little white house. It used to be a little white house. Right on the right hand side.
I just remember Miss Nellie's,
Okay, that was Miss Nellie's house.
and I don't remember another house. I just remember Miss
Okay.
Nellie's and
Well,
the
before
Reynolds.
you get to Miss Nellie's house, that's where Mr. Bertner had his groceries, his store. And then he had his house was on the corner, but it's set way back. And it was fenced in because most of it was fenced in. Because I used to take, this is if he wasn't in the store and it was somebody that wanted something in a hurry or something, he come out. And he was crippled, and he could cut up bologna and stuff. This is exactly, he take a ice pick and stick in that to that board he had, and he just, because he was all crippled up, but he
Amazing what you can do when you
he
have
could
to.
he
Yeah.
could do.
Our next grave to visit is that of Willie Kelly Crozier. And Willie was a female. Okay, Kelly was her maiden name. And what's unique about her grave is that her stone, is her stone. And Anne is going to tell you about the stone.
Yes.
But this year, Willie Kelly Crozier, she's the one that's got a rock for her head.
okay.
Mr. Bell made it, got it and put her name on it and everything.
Is it up there over to the left?
Yeah,
When you pull in, it's over on the
Uh-huh.
left.
you can see it pretty good because it's another, what is
Because
it,
a lot of that
strata.
stuff is just made out of, some of it was cement.
Okay, there are 145 burials documented on Find a Grave for this cemetery. We're relatively certain there are more, and they'll be found eventually, hopefully. I hope that you've enjoyed our tour today, and I hope you've learned a little bit about the people of Crescent Hill Cemetery. These people live quiet and unassuming lives. They each left their mark. And above all, they encouraged the future generations to leave their mark. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again next month.